In 1492, one woman's name appeared at the bottom of three world-altering documents. The first was an order expelling every Jewish person from Spain. The second commissioned a sailor named Columbus to cross an unknown ocean. The third formalized a decade-long religious inquisition that would burn people alive for believing the wrong things. That woman was Isabella of Castile, Queen of Spain. Depending on which history book you're reading, or which country printed it, she's either one of the greatest monarchs who ever lived, or one of the most destructive forces in the medieval world. She died in 1504. The Catholic Church opened a case for her sainthood in 1958. That process is still ongoing. Isabella almost certainly wouldn't have understood the controversy. She was a woman of iron principle, absolute faith, and complete conviction that everything she did was God's will. That's precisely what makes her story so disturbing, so fascinating, and so impossible to look away from. Isabella was born in 1451 in a small Castilian town. Her father was King John II of Castile, a man more interested in poetry than power. Her mother, Isabella of Portugal, was deeply devout and would later develop what historians carefully describe as a mental illness, spending years in near complete isolation after her husband's death. Isabella grew up watching her mother unravel. She also grew up in the court of her half-brother King Henry IV, a man whose reign was a slow-motion disaster, corruption spreading through the nobility, crime going unpunished, the kingdom splitting into factions. Henry was so ineffectual, so widely mocked, that his enemies staged a theatrical deposition. They put a puppet dressed as him on a throne and knocked it over in a public square. That was the political environment Isabella was raised in. What she took from it was a fierce, almost burning need for order, for unity, for a Spain that held together. At 19, she did something audacious. She secretly arranged her own marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon, her cousin, without the king's approval. To pull it off, she disguised herself as a widow attending a funeral, slipped out of the palace, and rode across Castile at night to meet him. It wasn't romance exactly. It was strategy. Ferdinand was her best political bet, and she knew it. When Henry died in 1474, Isabella declared herself Queen of Castile. A civil war followed. She won it. When Ferdinand's father died in 1479, he became King of Aragon. 2 kingdoms, 1 crown. Spain as we know it. The unified nation was born from that marriage. That origin story gets simplified endlessly into a fairy tale about 2 young lovers who built a country. The real story is more calculating. 2 ambitious monarchs who understood that personal power and national destiny were the same project and who never stopped working it. Isabella reformed Spain from the inside out. The Castile she inherited was lawless. Murder, robbery, extortion happening openly without consequence. Her first major act was creating a national police force, the Santa Hermandad, the Holy Brotherhood. She reorganized the courts. She reduced the power of the nobility. She eliminated royal debt. She standardized Spanish law. By almost every administrative measure, she transformed a fractured, chaotic medieval kingdom into something resembling a modern centralized state. Historians who focus on governance give her enormous credit for this, and they're not wrong to. She was also a genuine patron of learning. She invited humanist scholars to her court. She commissioned the first ever grammar of the Spanish language, published that same year as the Columbus voyage. She reportedly taught herself Latin as an adult. She believed education mattered. Her faith, though, was the engine beneath everything. Isabella didn't just practice Catholicism, she embodied it. Every decision she made passed through the lens of what she believed God required of her. She saw herself as an instrument of divine purpose. That sincerity is real, documented and widely acknowledged even by her critics. She wasn't cynically using religion to consolidate power, the way many rulers did. She genuinely believed. Which is what makes the rest of the story so difficult. The Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to retake the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, had been grinding forward for nearly 800 years before Isabella and Ferdinand completed it. In 1492, after a 10-year military campaign, the last Muslim kingdom on the peninsula, Granada, fell to their forces. This was the moment of her greatest glory, at least in her own eyes. Christian Europe celebrated. In London, Henry VII ordered hymns of praise. In Rome, a Spanish cardinal organized processions in the streets. 8 months later, Columbus sailed west. And in that same spring of 1492, Isabella and Ferdinand signed the Alhambra Decree. The Alhambra Decree gave every Jewish person in Spain 4 months to either convert to Christianity or leave. Anyone who stayed and refused baptism faced death. Anyone caught sheltering them faced the same. Let that sit for a moment. A community that had lived in Spain for over 1,000 years, through Roman rule, Visigoth rule, Moorish rule, was given until the end of July to cease to exist. The Jewish community in medieval Spain wasn't a marginal population living on the fringes. They were physicians, scholars, diplomats, financiers. Abraham Sr., the man who had helped arrange Isabella and First Place, was the chief rabbi of Castile. Don Isaac Abravanel, a philosopher and statesman, personally offered the monarchs 300,000 ducats to rescind the decree. The Grand Inquisitor Mas de Torquemada is said to have thrown a crucifix at Ferdinand's feet and told him Judas sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver. He wouldn't let these monarchs sell the faith for 300,000 ducats. The decree stood. Estimates of those expelled range from 40,000 to 200,000. Many fled to Portugal, where they were forcibly baptized 5 years later. Others went to North Africa, Italy, the Ottoman Empire. The Sephardic Jewish communities of Amsterdam, of Thessaloniki, of Istanbul, the ones that flourished in the Netherlands, those were built by the people Isabella drove out of Spain. The Jews of Spain had indeed lived alongside Muslims and Christians in what scholars call the convivencia, a period of relative coexistence, intellectual exchange, remarkable cultural cross-pollination. It wasn't a utopia. There were pogroms before Isabella. There was deep tension and periodic violence. The convivencia was real, but it was always fragile. Isabella didn't invent anti-Jewish sentiment in Spain. She didn't create it from nothing. What she did was institutionalize it, give it the full force of the state, and make it permanent. The decree wasn't formally rescinded until 1968. Then there's the Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition had begun in 1478, authorized by Pope Sixtus IV, at Isabella and Ferdinand's request. Its original target wasn't Jews, it was conversos, Jewish people who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of practicing Judaism in secret. The logic was that these people were heretics, and heresy was a crime against the state, not just the soul. Torture was a routine tool. Confessions were extracted on the rack, by starvation, by methods too methodical to dismiss as the work of a few sadists. The public trials, the auto da fe, were theatrical events attended by thousands, often including royalty. Those found guilty and unrepentant were burned at the stake. During the tenure of Torquemada alone, around 2,000 people were burned. The Tribunal of Seville, in its first 8 years, executed 700 people and sentenced 5,000 more to life imprisonment. Isabella knew all of this. She authorized it. She believed with absolute sincerity that purging false Christians was an act of mercy, saving souls from damnation by forcing them to choose. Some defenders of Isabella make a point that's worth hearing honestly. They note that she lived in the 15th century, not the 21st. That religious uniformity was considered a legitimate, even necessary function of the state across virtually all of Europe at the time. That Henry VIII was doing similar things in England decades later, and nobody debates sainthood for him. That judging Isabella by modern standards of religious freedom is anachronistic, and that we can't fairly apply a framework that didn't exist in her world. There's something to this. Moral progress is real, and it's genuinely complicated to hold historical figures accountable to standards that their entire civilization rejected. Isabella wasn't an outlier in 15th century European power. She was in many ways typical of it. The question is whether typical is the same as defensible. Columbus is the third thread, and it's the one that reaches furthest. Isabella financed his first voyage over the objections of most of her advisors. When Columbus brought back news of inhabited islands to the west, she authorized further expeditions. In 1493, the Pope declared Isabella and Ferdinand rulers of the Americas. In return, they were to convert the indigenous peoples. When reports reached Isabella that Columbus was enslaving the native Taino people and shipping them to Spain, she was genuinely angry. She asked, on record, "By what authority does the admiral give my vassals to anyone?" She ordered the enslaved people returned to freedom. That moment is often cited by Isabella's defenders as evidence of her moral seriousness. She drew a line. She meant it. Columbus was eventually stripped of his governorship, arrested, sent back to Spain in chains. Isabella did that. What she couldn't do, perhaps, was dismantle the system she'd set in motion. The encomienda, the labor system that essentially enslaved indigenous people under the cover of spiritual instruction, continued after Columbus. The extraction of gold continued. The violence continued. By 1514, the Taino population of Hispaniola had been reduced from somewhere between hundreds of thousands to perhaps 30,000. By 1565 to roughly 200. By 1802, they were officially declared extinct. Isabella was dead before the worst of it. She never saw what her expedition would produce. Whether that matters morally is a question each viewer has to answer for themselves. What's clear is this. She set the machinery in motion. She funded it. She gave it legal and spiritual cover. The letter and the spirit of her instructions made conquest possible. Isabella's legacy is Spain itself. The unified nation, the legal framework, the language that spread across an entire hemisphere. None of that happens without her. She's also the reason between 40,000 and 200,000 Jewish people had to rebuild their lives in other countries. She's the reason the Spanish Inquisition became a byword for state-sanctioned terror. She's one of the links in the chain that led to the near destruction of the indigenous cultures of the Americas. Those two things are both true. They don't cancel each other out. What her life asks us is a question that's still urgent. What do we do with leaders who are capable of genuine greatness and genuine horror in the same lifetime? Who build durable, lasting institutions and also burn people alive? Who condemn slavery in one breath and commission expeditions that make slavery possible in the next? It's easier if history gives us monsters. Pure villains are simple. Isabella isn't simple. She's something harder to look at. A person of real intelligence, real conviction, real administrative genius, who directed all of that capacity toward suffering on an enormous scale, and who died believing she'd served God faithfully. The Catholic Church hasn't made her a saint yet. They've been thinking about it for nearly 70 years. That hesitation might be the most honest thing anyone has said about her. Isabella herself reportedly said, "I will not be the cause of the ruin of a soul." She said it about Columbus enslaving the Taino. The irony of that statement, from the woman who expelled a civilization, who lit the fires of the Inquisition, is the whole story.